Welcome to this presentation in which we're going to talk about noun-pronoun agreement. This is unlike the passive and active voice stuff, which we've covered in previous sessions. Uh, Passive voice is completely grammatically okay. It's stylistically poor most of the time, but nobody's going to say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you caused that error." It's not an error, it's just bad form. Noun-pronoun agreement is a problem that most of us, and I include myself in this group, have. We all struggle with it, and when we're writing, we're going to have to keep an eye out to make sure we edit out these issues. The more time we spend practicing doing it right, in writing at least, the more likely we are to get it right when we're revising. So it requires a lot of focus. But it's a different focus than the passive and active voice, because if we mess up and do a passive voice, again, nobody's going to say, "Oh, that's grammatically wrong," or at least somebody might, but they'd be incorrect if they were to say that. But errors in this area are grammatically incorrect. So they're a more serious error than the passive voice. Again, you can have about 10% passive voice. You should have 0% of the errors that we're about to talk about. So the bar is higher in this area. I wanted to kind of prep you for that. I'm going to show you some resources that we have on this topic. And you'll see here we're in Module 9 of our course, and you'll see that we have the first item here, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. All of these items in noun pronoun resources are going to be helpful for you in sorting through whether you have a noun pronoun agreement issue. I have some items that I'm posting right here. These are near the bottom. So it's noun pronoun agreement 1 in class activity, noun pronoun agreement 2 in class activity, singular they in class activity. These are the 3 things we're going to focus on in this class. I think this topic works better if we spend less time on theory and more time on doing stuff. So what I encourage you to do is go through these examples with me, and if you are still a little bit uncertain, then go up here and look at these materials. Again, it's not a huge part of this class, but it's something that when you graduate, or hopefully before you graduate, you'll have a good grasp on. You're not going to be making these mistakes. Now, I say you're not going to be making these mistakes. I don't make these mistakes when I write, at least not my final version, but I do this all of the time when I speak. And so I'm not suggesting that you ought to aspire. I mean, it's lovely if you do. I'm not discouraging you, but I'm not sure it's a realistic aspiration to get this stuff right when we speak. We're going to make this mistake when we speak. But you know what? Even though it's wrong, I guess, very few people are going to say, "Oh, that person's uneducated. They made that noun pronoun agreement error when they were speaking." People don't judge people for doing it, and most of the time we're not even aware of it when it's spoken. It's when it's written that I care about, and that's what your reader cares about. For those, let me just, you may find this difficult to believe, but I promise you, for those people who have mastered noun pronoun agreement, and this is many, many legal professionals, when they see errors in this situation, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It is disruptive to them reading what they're reading, because they're all like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe they just made that error." So it pulls them out of whatever arguments you were trying to advance. And it also makes them think less of you, not just as a writer, but as a thinker, because the logic goes for many legal professionals, if you can't write grammatically correctly, I don't care what you have to think, because you're not working very hard. You're not at the level that I care about being persuaded by somebody at that level. So you really have to be pristine with your grammar. And this, again, goes back to that idea of practice. You may leave this presentation and think, "Oh, I've got that nailed." But if you didn't have it nailed beforehand, listening to me for an hour is not going to fix that problem for the rest of your life. It's a starting point. But you need again, when you're writing, check yourself, and I'll go through some techniques to check yourself in these areas. Will be helpful in terms of making these corrections. One thing that you will see when you read is that many sources in the larger society have decided that noun pronoun agreement isn't very important. You'll see these in newspapers, you'll see these in published books even. And so you since you're seeing it all the time, it's easy to kind of internalize that subconsciously. You're not aware of the fact that your sense of noun pronoun agreement is changing, but it really is. It may be that in other modes of writing, it's okay not to agree, not for the antecedent noun not to agree with the pronoun. It's not okay with legal writing. So you need to keep that standard separate. There are things that people can do in casual writing that you can't do in legal writing, and this is one of them. So be focused on this when you're doing this type of work, and recognize that just because you see other people writing this in non-legal work, it doesn't mean it's something you can carry over into legal work. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing we're gonna cover, I said we're not gonna do a lot of theory, but I am gonna do a little theory. And this is the theory that we're gonna cover here. So we have a list of our personal pronouns. Personal pronouns are sometimes called definite pronouns. So a personal pronoun refers to a person, and we use that term actually in this context. We're using the term person similar to how we use the term in the law. It doesn't necessarily mean a human being. You could be referring to your dog as a person or even your book as a person, but it's referring to a specific thing or human being. And so let's look at these. And again, if you've ever taken a foreign language, you've seen tables like this in whatever the foreign language is that you're learning, but you may not have ever seen it for English if English is your native language. So this may be a bit of a, what? What's going on here? So we have first person. First person is the person who is speaking. So in this case, when I speak, I am the first person. Cynthia Groover is the first person. And because you're the person hearing me, you, student in this class, are the second person. And if you and I sit here talk about Bob, who isn't in the class and who clearly isn't me, then Bob is the third person, the person who is not present. Maybe we're talking about Bob, and that would be the third person. Okay, so that's what first, second, and third person means from a grammatical standpoint. So let's look at first person. So in the singular form, these are the words that we're playing around with. I, me, myself, my, and mine. Today we're not going to talk about when we use I versus when we use me or myself or my or mine, but we all agree these terms mean the same person. When I say them, it means Cynthia Groover. When you say them, it means you. So then we have a plural form of first person. Well, that is when the speaker is adding another person. Typically that person is present, although not in every case does that person have to be present. So I might say, we are going to the party. So what I mean is I am going and at least one other person is going. It's plural. And again, we have all of those words which refer to the same group. We, us, ourselves, our, and ours. We use these in different grammatical contexts, so they do have a different meaning. We use we when well, let's go back to this. I use I when I am doing something. I brushed my teeth. We use me when we're saying he hit me on the nose. We use, well, I won't go through all the meanings, but you can see we're still referring to the same person that I was referring to when I said I, but it has a different function in the sentence. But we're not going to cover in this class when we use I versus when we use me and so forth. Let's look at the second person. So I already explained what it is. So you, and the reason why I've repeated is that we don't change you whether it's the subject of the sentence or the direct or indirect object of the sentence. Then we have yourself, your, and yours. Plural, in formal English, it has exactly the same structure except for the reflexive, which of course, since it's plural, we're going to change it from yourself to yourselves. But here in Texas, in everyday conversation, we don't typically refer to a group of people as you, because that's confusing. Do I mean just Bob? Let's say I'm talking to a group of Bob, Larry, and Teresa, and I say you. Am I talking just to Bob, or am I talking to Bob, Larry, and Teresa? It's unclear. So in the South, we've developed y'all, which of course is short for you all. It's the plural form of you. And so, and in other parts of the country, there are other forms. For example, I lived in Boston and Ohio for a time in my life. And in both of those places, they say you guys to make it plural. And in certain places, they say you'ns. So there can be other ways of handling this issue. Anyway, so this is informal. You wouldn't put this in written communication, but this is how we would speak this concept. Now let's go to third person. Third person, we have a bit of a complication. When I'm using first person, I don't focus on gender. I'm always female, but there's not in English one form of I that's for females and another form of I that's for males. It's the same way. Same way with we. The we that I'm talking about could be a group of women, or it could be a group of men and women. Or even could be me and my dog, so it's not a human being type situation. Similarly with you, we don't care about the gender. I'm talking to Bob, I'm going to say you. If I'm talking to Sally, I'm also going to say you. So we don't care about gender in the first person and second person. But when we get to the third person, we do care about gender. When we're in the singular mode, we're going and we're talking about a man, we'll say Bob. We're going to say he or him, himself, his, or again his. The reason I'm going to repeat it is so it's the form of the genitive case that is not followed by the noun. If you don't, that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. But if I'm referring not to Bob but to Teresa, I'm going to say she, her, herself, her, or hers. If I'm referring to Bob and I use she pronouns, the reader's going to be very confused. If I am talking about Teresa but I use these male pronouns, again, the reader's going to be very confused. But as a practical matter, nobody does that. I mean, if you're a native English speaker, you don't think, gosh, Bob's male, so what pronoun should I use when the person's male? Oh, he. No, there's no thought process there. It's an automatic thing. And then for non-humans, be they animals or inanimate objects like a book or a car, we use it or the various forms of it. And again, I repeat it here because whether it is the subject or the direct object, we're going to use the same version of it. Similarly, in the genitive case, both forms of it are its. And by the way, there's no apostrophe in this version of it. So these are pretty straightforward, and my guess is you don't make mistakes in these areas. It just doesn't happen. I have a friend who is from a different culture, and the language that he grew up speaking didn't use its pronouns didn't have gender associated with it. So sometimes he makes errors. Even though he's very fluent in English, sometimes he will say the wrong pronoun because it's not as automatic for him. But for us who are native English speakers, we don't think for a second about this. We're going to get this right virtually every time. So now we're going to the third person plural. And this can be a mixed situation. It could be a group of boys we're talking about, or men. It could be a group of girls we're talking about, or women. So it could be all one gender, or it could be all the other gender, or it could be all inanimate objects. Maybe it's my collection of books or stamps or cars or stones or whatever. Or it could be a mixed group, men and women in a group. Or it could even be men and objects, or women and objects, or men and women and objects all together. So you can have all levels of mixing of male, female, and non-human when we use the plural third person. No matter which combination they are, we're going to use they, them, themselves, their, and theirs. Okay, so those are the rules. This is a chart that you might want to use if you find yourself struggling with any of these concepts, especially if you're not a native English speaker. But if you are, this stuff probably is going to take care of itself, except in some unusual cases, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Okay, so every definite third person pronoun, so these are the definite third person pronouns right here, needs an antecedent. We don't have to have an antecedent when we're referring to ourselves, first person, because it's obvious. Whenever I say I, you know who I'm talking about, Cynthia Groover, because you know I'm speaking. And when I say you know I'm speaking to you. You know who you are. So there isn't a need for an antecedent to explain unless we're using a third person. So let's say in a conversation you and I are having, we spend some time talking about Bob and we spend some time talking about Larry. It's all kind of been mixed up, a little bit of Bob here, a little bit of Larry there. And then I say something like, he's a really good guy. You have no idea right now whether I'm talking about Bob or whether I'm talking about Larry. You assume probably I'm talking about one or the other of them. You know I'm not talking about both because I didn't say they are really good guys, right? So it's ambiguous. Which one of the two fellows we've been talking about did I mean to refer to? And that's where we get into the idea of an antecedent. Third person definite pronouns require an antecedent. And of course, antecedent means anti in this context doesn't mean anti like against. Ante in this context means before. So before, and then cedent means coming. So coming before. So an antecedent is a word that comes before something, in this case comes before the pronoun, which defines the pronoun. Because you have to define what it's going to be before you use it. So here's an example of this. Bob loves Mary. He intends to propose to her. So we see two pronouns here. Bob, we'll put Mary in pink, stay with the gender stereotypes. It's completely clear though that he is referring to Bob and her is referring to Mary. It's not ambiguous at all because Mary is a name that we identify as being female, so we know that Mary can't be he, and Bob is a name we identify as being male, so we know Bob can't be her. So this is completely clear. We can see how we've defined the he by looking at Bob. But let me just change this up. Best friends with Larry. He intends to invite him to his party. So we have three pronouns here. Now, I think most of us would probably think, actually, let me just change this up a little bit. We're going to change the original sense. Let's say, Bob and Larry are best friends. So you probably, as you read this, you probably assume that this he is one guy, and this him is a second guy, and this his is referring back to the first guy. Because, you know, you don't invite somebody to somebody else's party. You invite somebody to your own party. So this he and this his are probably the same person. And this him, by definition, has to be something different because you don't invite yourself to a party, right? But it's unclear right now whether this is Bob, and then, of course, Bob's, and this is Larry, Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Larry is the one who has a birthday. So it's Larry, and then Bob, and then Larry's. Now, many times in spoken English, it's obvious what people mean. We don't have to fall over ourselves defining it by by gesturing, by how we emphasize words. Things along those lines convey a lot of meaning. But when we just have the words, that's all we can work with. And so there's no way of interpreting this sentence for sure and to know who the he is, who he one is, and who him two is. So this is an ambiguous sentence. If I were to switch it and say Bob and Mary are best friends, then we would change this to her if it's Bob's birthday. It's completely clear. But when we're in one category, one gender, male, female, or the non-human gender, it is unclear. And so we have to be clear about, defining it in a way that makes sense. Precision in writing is so important in legal writing. You can give up a lot of stylistic points, and that's okay. But what you can't do is create a document that is unclear. Clarity is the real thing that drives everything, and that's why we become so picky about grammar, because when you don't follow the grammar rules, you're inserting sometimes a little bit of ambiguity, sometimes a lot of ambiguity into the document. And so if we can follow those rules as carefully as possible, and also even when we're following the rules, make sure that every word we're using is very, very clear what it means, then we are going to be in a much better place to be successful. So let's go through some. These are all very easy questions. I'm not pretending for a second that they're difficult. These are just to kind of get us started so we can play the game a little bit better. So in our first sentence, we have the word he. That's our pronoun. Now we're trying to figure out what the antecedent is. Well, we know he is singular, third person singular. Look right here, we have the word he. So we know that our antecedent has got to be just a single person. In this case, John. When John slipped on the step, he fell. If we were going to have John and Joe be the antecedent, when John and Joe slipped on the step, that's plural, more than one, we would need to use they. Now, you didn't need me to tell you that, but you would have gotten that right every single time. But what I'm trying to show you is the rule that makes that work. And so once you know the rule, not just unconsciously, but consciously, then when we get into ambiguous situations, you're ready to handle it. Okay, let's go to the next one. Our pronoun here is there. And of course, we know that there is plural right here. It's in the plural column. So we know our antecedent has to be plural. So we're going to go with doctors because that's obviously the plural form. The doctors believed their diagnosis of a fracture was correct. If it were just one doctor who's the only person involved in this diagnosis, then we would have said his, or maybe if it's a woman, her, or if we're not sure, his or her diagnosis. But because we use their here, we know that our antecedent also has to be plural. Okay, again, we have the their antecedent, so we know that the their pronoun, so we know our antecedent has to be plural. So it's got to be cats. If it were just one cat, we would need its, or if this was our pet and we prefer to use human-like pronouns and it's a female cat, we'd use her. If it's a male cat, we'd use his. So this time we're given the antecedent, cups, and now we're trying to pick which pronoun we ought to use. Since this is plural, we should use the plural pronoun, there. If we had used its, then we should have said the cup. The cup is sitting in its saucer, and probably there would just be one saucer. So here our antecedent is men. Even though it doesn't end with an S, we know it's plural. And so because this is men, we're going to have to use they. to match in terms of number and case. I guess I should stay with the green here, shouldn't I? And let's just refresh for a second what we have to match up. We need to match number and gender. So if our antecedent is singular, we have to be in this section. If our antecedent is plural, we need to be in this section when we choose our pronoun. We also need to match in terms of gender if it's singular. So if it's male, we need to be here. If it's female, we need to be here. If it's non-human and it's not a pet, we need to be here. So we have to match both of those components. Here, Joe did not think, so Joe is our antecedent. And obviously Joe is singular and it's male, so we're going to go with he, singular male. The they would be if we had Joe and Bob or Joe and Teresa. Two people are they, one person's going to be a he or a she, in this case he. This one we have two people in our group, Sarah and Jane. They're both girls, but that doesn't really affect us because we don't care about gender when it's plural because after all, we just have one form. It's a little bit like, you know, the second person and the first person. The only time really we care about gender is this third person area, singular, third person singular. So if it were just Jane, she was by herself riding her bicycle, we'd say Jane rode her bicycle at 2 p.m. Same way if it were Sarah. Sarah rode her bicycle at 2 p.m. The peony bushes, this is plural, so we know it's going to be there. If we just had one bush, then we would say the peony bush has lost its petals, but there's more than one, so we're going to say there. Here we have his or her. So when you have a plural, when you have, go up here, when you have a singular word, then the word or, and singular word, that is the equivalent of singular. When we have, and we've already seen this, when we have singular word like Sarah and singular word like Jane, then that is plural. So going back here, his or her, singular or singular, that means we need a singular antecedent. People is plural, a person is singular. I'm going to finish this up, then we're going to go back and talk about 9 in a second. So here we have there is our pronoun. That's plural, so we need more than one person as our antecedent. Jack alone isn't going to work, so we need Jack and Mary. Now I'm going to make a confession. Let's go back to 9. You know what? If I had started my sentence with people, if I'd start my sentence with a person, let's give that example first. I might well have said there. A person should always try to be helpful to their classmates. I might have done that. I might have said, it's incorrect. Yeah, I suppose it is, but it's so common. And all of us hear it all the time that I'm guessing that you're in the same boat that I am and that you would have been tempted to say a person should always try to be helpful to their classmates. And I think, some may disagree, but I think in spoken English it's absolutely fine. It's going to come across almost as pretentious maybe if you walk around saying his or her. I think it sounds a little pretentious. Maybe you disagree. I think it's okay to say it in spoken language. It's not okay in legal written language because it's ambiguous. You say person, but then you say there. What's the antecedent? It's an ambiguous sentence. I've created ambiguity by not matching my pronoun to the antecedent in both gender and number. So you may be thinking, well, why am I tempted? And if you're in the same situation, why are you tempted to say there instead of his or her? The reason is that we don't have a way of communicating gender in our plural form, right? So when we don't know a gender, in this case we don't have a gender, a person. Obviously a person could be a man or a woman. So we don't know if we should say his or we don't know if we should say hers. It's left open. We don't have a form here that is gender neutral. To refer to the person who's a human being by using it would be, number one, highly ambiguous. No one would really understand what you're doing. And it would also be insulting, right? A person should always try to help its classmates. I mean, that doesn't sound right at all. So our problem is, and let me just write it here, problem, no gender neutral choices. That is where our problem begins. And most of our problems stem from this fact. We don't have a way that's easy, that's elegant, to refer to a single antecedent that is ambiguous. Now, I mean, when we know it's bushes, we know we're going to, or a single bush, we know we're going to use its. That's not offensive. When we're talking about Sarah, we know she's a woman, we're going to say her. When we're talking about Joe, we know he's a boy, so we're going to say he. But let's say it's somebody named Pat. And in our context, we don't know Pat's gender. Or maybe it's a Chris. Or maybe it's a name from a different culture and we don't know what the gender of that person is because we're not into that culture. In those cases, how do we respond? We have the name, but we don't know the gender. And so many times what we'll start doing is we'll start saying they. So if I'm talking about Chris, let's say Chris is one of my online students and I'm describing something that happened to Chris. And so I don't know if Chris is a man or a woman. So I very possibly would say Chris does not think they should have to retake the test. Because I don't know if I should say he or I don't know if I should say she. I could say Chris did not think he or she should have to retake the test. But again, I'm likely to say they. And so that's the problem that we have in English, that we're missing a really helpful pronoun. We're missing this category of pronoun. I don't know if we'll get one like that anytime soon. Hard to say. We might or might not, but the problem is, I think when one understands the problem, it helps one respond to it. So now let's address those issues by looking at our second assignment, in-class assignment. It's not an assignment for you to do outside of class. So here we have the doctor. This is our antecedent, so I'm going to put it in yellow. Now the doctor might be a man or it might be a woman. Since the doctor went to medical school, we shouldn't say they because there's just one doctor in the story. And you know that the they only applies to plural situations. So we're going to go with she. Obviously, if the doctor were a male, we would go with he. If we didn't know, we could say she or he. If I'm going to skip 2 for now. Let's go to 3. Because the members of the chemistry class, so this is our whole subject. The beginning part is members. So there's more than one member to this class, so it's plural. So we're going to use they. I had to take a makeup test. Now, sometimes what teachers do in this situation is they might say, because the chemistry class did poorly on the exam. Now, a class is made up of human beings, but it in of itself is a singular word. So technically the way to do this, and none of us would actually say this, but this is the way it should go in a written format. Because the chemistry class did poorly on the exam, it had to take a makeup exam. None of us would say that because we think about let's say there's 17 students in the class. We think about each one of the 17 students doing poorly on the test, so we're naturally drawn to saying they. It doesn't work when we say the chemistry class, but it works great when we say the members of the chemistry class. So the takeaway here is sometimes the right way to fix the problem isn't to change the pronoun, but it's to change the antecedent. So if you're not sure of a gender and it's logistically possible to make the antecedent plural, that can be the way to go. Okay. Due to the fact that my car, that's going to be our antecedent. So it's just one car. I just own one car. I don't expect it to run. Go ahead and highlight this. If we'll move on. Let's just do 50. If people do not like to shop in the store, so people is our antecedent, and of course we must have more than one person to say people, so we're going to say they. If people do not like to shop in that store, they should not go there. So we need to use they because they is plural and people is plural. We'll skip 6 for now. Let's go on to 7. When computers crash, that is our antecedent. It's plural, so we're going to need to use they. They need. If we said when a computer crashes, we would say it needs. You can see that the form of the verb changes whether we're saying they or it. We don't think about it if we're native English speakers. We just say it. It comes out correct. So when computers crash, they need to be fixed immediately. When a computer crashes, it needs to be fixed. Right, so we're just going to go back to the original form. And so just remember that when you're changing pronouns around, if they're the subject of the sentence, you sometimes have to change the verb, especially if it's in present tense. A typical shopper, that's our subject here. You can see it's singular. So we're going to go with she. She is. We could also have gone with he. He is. We wouldn't use they because a typical shopper, we can see it's singular because the way to make the word shopper plural in English is to add an S. And so we see there's no S at the end. We also see the use of the word a, which is what we use for singular item. We can even see we have the singular verb. If it were typical shoppers do not like it. But no, that's not how we chose to phrase this. We chose to signal that it's singular with the a, that it's singular with no s at the end of shopper, and that it's does and not do. And so we need to use he or she here, not they. But again, I'll tell you, in everyday conversation, I would certainly say a typical shopper does not like it when they are constantly interrupted by a salesperson. That's incorrect, but as I said before, it's typical. It's fine in spoken, just don't do it in written. Okay, if you need help with your grammar, that's our antecedent. And we aren't going to switch to third person when we're in second person. So we're going to say you need to take advantage of this online tutorial. Got the colors wrong up here. I apologize. Make sure I got the colors right. Oh, we haven't done that one yet. Okay, and then our last one is before students, so our antecedent is plural. They should prepare. We could rewrite it before a student takes a test, he should prepare. A student is singular, he is singular. Students are plural, they is plural. Let's go up here and look at the two that I skipped. If anyone has an opinion about capital punishment. So anyone is singular. I mean, it's pretty obviously singular because it ends with, one. Anyone, everyone, someone, all of those words are singular. But anyone has a plural kind of implication or hint, doesn't it? Because we're not talking about Bob. It could have been Bob, it could have been Sally, it could have been Teresa, it could have been Mary, it could have been Juan, it could have been George, it could have been anybody, right? That's what the term means, which is a universe of thousands and millions of people, right? So grammatically it's singular, but its meaning is plural. Which one controls? It's all about the grammar here. So because this is singular, we need to use he. If anyone has an opinion about capital punishment, he should state it. Now, I would say he or she should state it is probably the better, because he's kind of sexist, to be honest, because anyone includes women as well as men, obviously. And so in this context, to say he would suggest that women aren't being considered. Let's go to our other one that I skipped, and that is any worker. This is another one we can see is singular because we know how to make worker plural. We put an S at the end of it, and there is no S. So any worker is singular, so we need to go with his. And again, because workers can be women, I'm going to say his or her. But it has a plural meaning. We could have said, workers can break their arms during an accident. It has the same meaning, but when I make workers plural, I'm going to have to use the plural pronoun, their. If I keep it grammatically singular, I'm going to need to have a singular pronoun. Again, this meaning here might be plural, but from a grammar standpoint, it's singular. So I think we've gone through all of those. And now we're going to talk about the singular they, and that's what I've been kind of hinting at. Let me go back to the first document and uncover this. And this is the problem that we're really going to focus on. Oops, did not mean to do that. I apologize. Here we go. The issue that we're going to focus on is, what do we do when there is only one person that we're talking about, but about whom we are talking, but we do not know the gender of that person. Again, it's a situation where we have Pat or we have Chris. Many of y'all are too young to remember this, but there was a Saturday Night Live skit that went on for a long time that involved this character named Pat. And the punchline of every joke was, we weren't sure if Pat was a man or a woman. Pat was oblivious to our confusion, but everyone kind of fell over themselves trying to figure out what pronoun to use, and so they would ask Pat questions to hopefully ferret out whether he was a man or a woman, and he would always, or she would always give answers. I don't know which pronoun to use here. The actor was a man, so I'll say he. He would always give answers that left the confusion still in place, and it was very frustrating. But imagine we were discussing or describing that person. We don't know that person's gender, so how do we use these? We don't know the gender, because again, we don't have a gender neutral choice. Our default in spoken language is to come over here and use these forms, but that's not going to work in legal writing. So, and then the other situation is, what do we do when we use an indefinite singular pronoun that conveys a plural meaning? So we've been talking here about definite pronouns, but let's look at indefinite pronouns. Let me give you some examples. This is a non-exhaustive list. Everyone, someone, anyone, all, everybody, somebody, anybody. And these are just a few examples. All of these, well, I'm going to remove all because all is a confusing one. All of these imply plurality, but they are grammatically singular. There's just one body. There's not bodies. There's just one. It's not any two. It's any one, right? So we follow the grammar, not the inherent meaning. I'm going to write that here. Follow the grammar to figure out the number. Do not consider the inherent meaning of the pronoun. So now we're going to go to the singular they workshop. This is an example of situations where you probably would use they or them or their in spoken English, but you're not going to use it when you're writing. When a person talks too much, blank, learn little. So our antecedent is a person. Obviously this is singular, and so we need to have a singular antecedent. I mean, this is singular, our antecedent is singular, so we need our pronoun to be singular. So we could write it like this. Obviously a person can be a man or a woman. So when a person talks too much, he or she learns little. Another way would be to change the antecedent. When people talk too much, they learn little. Oftentimes, changing the antecedent is the better course because we can avoid the pitfall of the he or she issue. So this one is wrong. Let me just write here. Wrong. And this is right. And this is right. Let's go to the next one. The boys knew that Santa Claus loved them despite a few naughty deeds. So the boys is our antecedent. Boys, obviously we see an S here, so we know it's plural. So we expect it to be plural here, and it is plural. So this sentence is correct. All right, correct. Maybe that will be better for me to use. So sometimes they, or the form of they that we're using, in this case them, is correct, and sometimes it won't be. When you're working on legal documents, especially until you get this well mastered, you probably are going to want to do a word search of the document, and you're going to want to word search these words right here. And then you're going to find the word, then you're going to look to see what's my antecedent, and is it plural? And if it isn't, then you're going to have to rewrite the sentence. Maybe changing the pronoun, maybe changing the antecedent, maybe changing the whole sentence. Lots of different techniques to do that. But those are your choices. And let me just show you another way of fixing sentence one. Let's see. People who talk too much learn little. So in this case, I just removed the pronoun entirely. I rewrote the sentence to remove the need for a pronoun. I mean, who is technically a pronoun, but I removed the choice between they and he here. Let's look at number 4. The books gathered dust on the shelves because no one bothered to read them. So books is our antecedent. It's plural. We can see that with the S. And then the them is also plural. So again, this sentence is correct. A person cannot help their birth, Rosalind replied with great liberality. So our antecedent is a person, which is singular. We see it's not people. But we see that Rosalind used their. So this is incorrect. Now in legal writing, it's important not to change quotes. So if this is really what Rosalind said on the witness stand, we should keep it the way it is. But let's say this is a fictional story we're writing. We would revise it to say a person can't help his or her birth, ... And then, or we could do this. People can't help their births. We have to make it plural because obviously we don't share a birth with anyone other than a twin. And even then you might say they're separate births. So those are examples of how to fix it. So this would be correct. And this would be correct. So a person paired up with his or her. People paired up with their. And again, you're going to need to add that S to births. Oops. I'm going to put that in blue. A teacher cleared their throat and began to lecture about polynomials. Our title is teacher. Our antecedent is teacher. No S at the end of teacher, so we know it's singular. So we can't have there here. So this is incorrect. This is one of those singular there examples. So we're going to say, if we know the gender of the teacher, we could say the teacher cleared her throat. That would be correct. And it sounds like this is a particular event. It's not like we're making a global statement about it. Every single teacher who's ever talked about polynomials has cleared her throat before she began. But let's say that were a true fact, that all teachers everywhere do that. Teachers cleared their throats. Again, we don't share a throat with somebody else. So we would have to make that plural. But again, it doesn't really make sense in the context, so I'm going to make that go away. The dog lost their home and the family moved to another city. So the dog is singular, no S at the end of dog. And so this is an easy fix. This is wrong because we were using there. But maybe we don't know the gender of the dog. Now with dogs, we don't have to say his or her. We can say its. Some people prefer to use the his or her, and so you certainly can use it, but probably for this case, since we don't know, it's better to go with its. The children's toys, that's our antecedent. You can see it's plural because it ends with an S. Were new and shiny because the parents had just bought them. So this is, of course, plural, plural, and plural, so we're good to go. This is a correct one. The committee. Here we have what's called a collective noun. It's a noun that is grammatically singular. We can see there's no S, and yet there's obviously by definition more than one person on the committee. There may be 10, 20, 100 people on the committee, and so it is a collective noun is a noun that even in its singular format implies plurality. But in American English, we focus on the grammar structure, not upon its inherent meaning. I have heard that in British English, it's the opposite. So if you move to Britain or even to other countries like Canada or Ireland, it's good to check to see how they handle collective nouns. But here in good old US of A, we're not going to use there in this situation because it's just one committee, so we're going to say it's. The committee reviewed its agenda. And this is wrong. But we could change this because sometimes sentences like this sound weird. So we could say this: the committee members reviewed their agendas, and since presumably each one of them got an agenda, this would also be correct. So again, this is a case of us changing the antecedent so we can have a better ear match with our pronoun. And again, it does require, though, when you're making this edit, to go ahead and change, since you have to make things plural. Not always, but it definitely happens from time to time. A third way of working with this sentence would be the committee reviewed the agenda. That's also correct. Sometimes you can just remove the second pronoun entirely and it works. Mary and Bob owned. So our our antecedent is going to be Mary and Bob. Obviously it's plural. A singular plus a singular is a plural. 1 plus 1 is 2, in other words. Own 2 cars. Actually, no, this isn't. Sorry. I jumped the gun there. Silly me. It's the 2 cars that are antecedent. And because it's plural, S at the end of cars, we know that we need to have a plural pronoun, them. So this is correct. Tomatoes taste better if they are not kept in the refrigerator. This is so true. If you didn't know this secret, trust me on this one. So we have tomatoes, plural. We see the ES at the end. So we want to make this plural here. So this is correct. We need, well, it's not cooperating, is it? Okay. We need a manager. So it's singular, no S at the end, who is reasonably flexible in their approach. This is a plural, so we know this doesn't work. Now, again, what the writer or speaker is pointing out is that the manager doesn't have to be a woman and doesn't have to be a man. It could be either gender. So they could have said, we need a manager who is reasonably flexible in his or her approach. Correct. Or, and I guess we just need one manager, so we couldn't really say we need managers who are, it sounds like there's just a need for a single manager. So this is probably the best way of fixing that. So let me go ahead and highlight this. In that case, the young guest will have to give up their seat to the older attendee. So the young guest is our antecedent. We can see there's no S at the end of guest, so it's singular, and yet we use the plural here. And of course, again, we don't know the gender of the young guest. We don't know if it's a man or a woman or a boy or a girl. So we could write that. In that case, the young guest will have to give up his or her seat and I'm guessing in this situation that it's not referring to a single time. It could happen multiple times. In that case, the young guests will have to give up their seats to the older attendees. Correct. So we're going to put this in. Flag this S, and you can see we also had to flag another S, so you have to think about the whole sentence. Sometimes you have to make a change in the verb, sometimes you have to make a change in some of the nouns. Larry likes to read mysteries, but they sometimes cause him to stay up. So mysteries is our antecedent. It's plural, we can see with the S, and they is also plural, so we're good. This sentence is correct. The team does not want to lose their one chance at going to the playoffs. So we have team. Obviously, a team is going to have more than one person on it. But this word is singular. We know how to make the word team plural. We add an S, and there is no S here. So because, again, in American English, the grammar controls. And you can see here another, let me just go back up to this point here where we had the commit, actually not good. Here, when we're in present tense, we can see we have the word does. If it were teams, we wouldn't say the teams does not want. We'd say the teams do not want. So our verb also helps us know, hey, this noun here is singular. So this there here is not going to work. And again, a team, even though it's made up of human beings, the entity is not a human being. So if we were to keep it the same way, we'd have to go with it's one chance at ... So this is wrong and this is correct. But again, there's an easy fix if this sounds awkward to your ears. What we can do is say the team members or the players on the team do not want to lose their one chance. And this is also correct. So I'm going to highlight a few things here. And I'm going to, so I'm going to maybe right here, not going to let me highlight that, are they? But we can see that I've removed the ES here. Maybe I'll just write it here and highlight it and cross it out. Here's our final one. The store ran out of their best-selling item. So our antecedent is store. We know how to make store plural. We add an S, and yet there is no S at the end, so this is singular. And so we need to not use their here, which is plural. So this is going to be wrong. So we can rewrite it the store ran out of its best selling item. This would be correct. We could also write it, we could say the store employees ran out of their best selling item. That would also be correct. Here's another example how we can change the antecedent if we don't like changing the pronoun. I hope that this presentation has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by my office hours or raise them in class with us. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.